Human history is largely a story of insignificance. It's a 200,000-year-old tale of biological oblivion on a planet where, until recently, our species was seldom heard, seen, or felt. Isolated by vast wilderness, we lived in caves, remote camps, and rural hamlets for more than 99% of our ancestral past. How did we move from a world where people were rare to a world of people everywhere? Why did we seek to control non-human nature, not just its food, water, energy, minerals, and climate system, but the very soul of its being, the wilderness and wildlife from which we co-evolved? Will we succeed in dominating this planet so extensively that we jeopardize its ecological life support system? These are some of the questions posed by scientists who believe we have entered a new epoch of geological history, the Anthropocene. It represents a period in which human activity is profoundly affecting Earth's geochemistry, climate, ecosystems, and biological diversity. Human actions are also shrinking open space and decimating wild places where people used to enjoy solitude in environments not yet visibly altered by our species. Even the ocean is at risk. It is being stripped of commercial fish while its waters are being chemically altered by acidification caused by CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels and from deforestation. The fluidity of these changes makes it difficult to pinpoint a single cause, but taken together, they represent a formidable set of interlocking, slow-motion crises. This course will examine each of these linked crises and what can be done to avoid them, or at least manage their consequences. It is one of the most important courses you can take to discover your personal connections to the web of life and to the Earth systems that support it. The Earth is not just our home, it is the terra firma of our existence. In fact, it is the home of all life as we know it. While life on other planets is a tantalizing possibility, the variety of organisms found in a single human intestine may far exceed anything astrobiologists are likely to find in outer space. Human well-being depends on the biodiversity of Earth for much of its creativity, sensory stimulation, and identity formation. When we transform the natural world to suit our comfort and material wants, we cut ourselves off from a major source of what makes life magical and mysterious. While splendid havens of natural beauty remain in the Anthropocene, most are being fragmented or overrun by a human presence that is largely insensitive to the collateral damage it inflicts. Understandably, some say that the Anthropocene marks an era of mindless mass destruction, but that is not the whole story. It also signals a convergence of human ingenuity, technology, and socio-political necessity that promises to improve the human condition and restore many natural systems. Learning about the Anthropocene will reveal the hidden damage we are doing to this planet and hopefully lead to solutions for undoing or minimizing that damage. But for these solutions to be truly effective, we will have to learn how to confront humanity's hubris, learn how to recognize ecological limits, and develop the vision and political will needed to move beyond the Anthropocene into a new age of sustainability. Hello, I'm Monty Hempel, and I'll be your host for this 10-part series. Together, we will explore the Anthropocene in what promises to be a fascinating look at the challenges of creating a sustainable future. To help you figure out who I am and where I'm coming from, I'll give you a 1-minute bio. I'm a baby boomer blend of teacher, parent, citizen, scientist, author, underwater explorer, filmmaker, and haphazard observer of the human condition. My formal education and outlook is highly interdisciplinary, building on academic degrees in ecology, international relations, environmental policy, and creative work in the arts and humanities centered on documentary filmmaking. I live in California, but consider myself to be a global citizen who loves adventure travel with an educational purpose. A pragmatic idealist, I'm struggling to cope, like most of you, with the simultaneous upsurge of good and evil in today's global society, all part of what's been called the Great Acceleration. Former students know my mantra. Time is short, and change that sustains is slow. If you watch this series carefully, you will discover a world at once more menacing, more beautiful, more interconnected, more fragmented, more inspiring, and more fragile than the one you thought you lived in. If you can handle the tensions created by that paradox, you are well on your way to becoming a complex critical thinker and an informed global citizen. Most people don't regard themselves as global citizens, in deference to family and place-based connections that push them to experience life locally. But the provincial thinking that led to the Anthropocene will not protect us from its global consequences. Until the 20th century, it was normal and often realistic to regard human impacts on the Earth as being very limited and local, or at most regional in scope. Today we know better, but do we know enough to truly understand the challenge we face? Before we can understand the Anthropocene, we need to understand some of the human behavior that created it. Humans are an amazingly diverse and adaptive species, but they all share powerful capacities for interdependence and empathy. Perhaps the essence of what makes us human is our ambivalence about these two capacities. We struggle from birth to death over the idea of interdependency, and empathy, for all of its connective ability, can be painful, especially when it involves the innocence of youth or the suffering of humans and animals. We see in the eyes of children the possibilities for a better world, one that eluded most of us while growing up. What we learn with our hearts more than our brains is that the most precious moments we experience in life are extensions of empathy and interdependence. There are, of course, other views of human behavior that try to deny the power of empathy and interdependence. This denial serves the interest of unfettered market expansion, human domination, hyper-individualism, and withdrawal from larger communities, both human and ecological. The behaviors of greed, domination, and separation that they reinforce are the building blocks used to create the Anthropocene. In this course, you will have to consider how your own worldviews deal with this process of human domination. There are many pathways that may be followed, but most bring us to the same questions. What is our connection with other people and with nature? And how much does it matter for our own happiness and well-being? And what about the happiness and well-being of others, both living and yet to be born? The tone of this master course, like the music chosen for the soundtrack, is tenderly bittersweet. Concepts of empathy and interdependence, like joy and sorrow, must be braided together in ways befitting the magnificence and vulnerability of our living planet. This kind of braided learning is essential for achieving a balanced perspective of life. Hence, I ask you to approach this course with steadfast hope and a deep sense of wonder, while leaving time to grieve about today's appalling loss of wildlife, wilderness, and ecological wealth. To be well educated and truly alive in the 21st century, you'll need to acquire an appreciation of interdependence and empathy. Without it, your learning capacity will decline, and your self-absorbed experience of life will make you old long before your time. I fear that without acceptance of interdependence and a broad spectrum sense of empathy for tomorrow's children, human civilization may not survive the Anthropocene. Many of us have forgotten the simple environmental truths of the past. What we put into the air, water, and soil, we inevitably put into the web of life and into ourselves every time we eat, breathe, drink, and otherwise exist. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. And we won't leave the Anthropocene because we run out of fossil fuels. No, this is not principally about scarcity or material progress. It's about building sustainable communities, and it will require emotional intelligence, not just science and technology, to succeed. But before we discuss sustainable remedies, let's make sure we understand the historical roots of the Anthropocene. Humans have been transforming the face of the earth for a long time. In fact, many thousands of years before these earth-moving machines first appeared. They did it with fire, spears and arrows, levers and axes, irrigation, plows, and domestic animals. Primarily, they did it with agriculture. But it is only in recent times that the power of industrial transformation has reached a global scale, one in which Earth systems themselves are being altered. Human civilization has occurred entirely within what is called the Holocene, the nearly 12,000 years of relatively stable climate since the last ice age. It has been, on the whole, a remarkably benign period of Earth history for human potential to thrive and for human populations to soar. It is astounding to learn how rapidly the human footprint has transformed the history of the Earth.
If you look at a logarithmic scale of Earth chronology, the history of Homo sapiens becomes the thickness of a very thin line on the screen. If you scaled it to a lifespan of, say, 80 years, human civilization would all take place in the last 2 hours of life. If the Earth's timeline was compressed into the seconds of a 24-hour clock, we would see that life doesn't even begin until about 4 a.m. And Homo sapiens only shows up in the last 4 seconds before midnight. Our entire civilization takes up the last quarter of a second. The Anthropocene begins in the last few milliseconds.
Unlike most geological epochs, the start of the Anthropocene can be dated with relative precision. A good approximation would be the early 1950s, with the decision to accelerate atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons, which spread radioactive fallout, especially plutonium, over wide areas of land and sea, particularly in the Pacific. The mid-20th century was also a time of sharply accelerating use of fossil fuels, massive diversions of fresh water for agriculture and industry, the rapid spread of plastics and other man-made chemical compounds in the environment, and a global surge in manufactured nitrogen and aluminum as industrial processes replaced natural ones. For example, 98% of the world's aluminum is man-made and was produced since 1950. During that same period, industrial processes doubled the nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations throughout most of the world. In fact, about half of the nitrogen found today in human tissue can be traced to the invention of the Haber-Bosch process of artificial nitrogen fixation. All of these geochemical signatures could be considered early markers of the Anthropocene.
The Haber process and similar technological achievements have pushed us toward a man-made world. Yes, we've doubled the nitrogen and phosphorus content of the soil, nearly doubled the CO2 in the atmosphere, and allowed hundreds of man-made chemicals to contaminate breast milk and become detectable in the most remote corners of the land and ocean. We've managed to introduce microplastics into water, soil, and food chains in so many places that we are unwittingly and invisibly making them part of our own diet. Perhaps most disturbing of all, we are decimating global populations of wildlife and wild places in ways that are becoming irreversible. We've lost more than half of Earth's wild animals in just the last 4 decades.
All 4 of the Earth's major systems are being altered by human actions. None of these impaired systems are beyond repair, but all have finite capacities for resilience and regeneration, and all will require continued human intervention to undo the damage being caused by past human practices and short-sighted actions. There is something deeply ironic about the situation in which humanity finds itself. We have achieved dominion over the Earth, including most of the ecosystem's energy flows and nutrient and material cycles that power living systems. Yet enormous numbers of humans have actually lost access to clean air, clean water, healthy forest, productive topsoil, open space, and connections to other species. Most humans enjoy state-of-the-art smartphones, but they've lost their connection to a thriving web of life. Can we become whole human beings in such a world? In the next class meeting, we will examine the importance of systems thinking for understanding the nature of threats posed to the Anthropocene and the types of solutions and strategies needed to neutralize or reduce those threats. Join us for some thoughts about how we can rescue this planet while increasing our own prospects for happiness and a future that is green, prosperous, fair, and inspirational.